Friday edition of PFTPM. Charean Williams, Mike Florio here with you. Miles Simmons is going to join us in a while as we try to figure out the next destination of J.J. Watt. Yes, I was wondering earlier this morning, Charean, what are we going to talk about at 5 p.m. Eastern on the first Friday after the end of the season? I thought it was going to be the Pouncey twins retiring, but we got something a little more significant today, don't we?
Yeah, the Pouncey twins kind of took a back seat to Mr. J.J. Watt, Mike. So, yeah, we have something to talk about. This is usually the lightest week of news, and we've had some news to talk about this week, so it should pick up from here.
Yeah, the Pouncey twins have to be irritated, to say the least. Their moment in the sun lasted for about, an hour and a half before we got the news straight from J.J. Watt. And here's the video he posted earlier today that let everyone know that after 10 seasons, he would be leaving the Houston Texans.
I have sat down with the McNair family, and I have asked them for my release, and we have mutually agreed to part ways at this time. I came here 10 years ago as a kid from Wisconsin who'd never really been to Texas before, and now I can't imagine my life without Texas in it. The way that you guys have treated me, besides draft night, I mean, you guys booed me on draft night, but every day after that, you treated me like family, and I truly feel like you're my family. Since that day, I have tried to do everything in my power to work and earn your respect and try and make you proud on and off the field. I'm excited and looking forward to a new opportunity, and I've been working extremely hard, but at the same time, it is always tough to move on. And I just want you guys to know that I love you. I appreciate you. I appreciate the McNair family for giving me, drafting me and giving me my first opportunity in the NFL. Thank you, Houston. I love you.
And there it is. And he said there would be no press conference. He wanted the fans to hear it straight from him. I just wonder... I wonder who didn't want the press conference. Because 10 years, Charean, you would think there would be a gathering, and I know it's different in a pandemic, but you would think there would be some scenario where Cal McNair, Nick Caserio, David Culley, maybe a little warm-up routine from Jack Easterby, maybe a quick 5 to 10 minute set from him, just to get the crowd, comfortable. And have a real press conference. Isn't that amazing that they didn't do that?
Yeah, it's truly unbelievable. I grew up in the Houston area, and I have friends and family who are season ticket holders. And you look at all the players who have departed Houston over the last 2 years, from Garrett Cole to George Springer to Russell Westbrook to James Harden to DeAndre Hopkins and now to J.J. Watt, and J.J. Watt, no doubt, is the biggest of all those names to leave, and there is no press conference. We don't get to hear from him, and you do wonder if it's from the Texans. The Texans have a new GM. They have a new head coach. They haven't coached or been the GM of J.J. Watt since he's been there, so maybe it was part of that. Part of it was probably also Cal McNair, and I assume Janice McNair would have been there too. In the statement, it says that was her favorite player, so I assume she would have been there. And I also assume that they didn't want to answer any questions about Deshaun Watson and the future of the organization and where it lies right now, Mike, because there are a lot of unanswered questions in Houston right now.
But there are ways to deal with that. And if you have a good relationship with the media, if you have a great PR director who has they fired her. If you have somebody who can, just talk to people ahead of time and say, we want this day to be about J.J. Watt out of respect to him. And I'm curious whether or not J.J. Watt didn't want it. I wonder whether or not he's at his wit's end, Charean, with the organization. We saw him tweet last week in response to the firing of the equipment manager by presumably Jack Easterby. And it's possible that J.J. Watt's got the same mindset right now that Deshaun Watson has out of here.
And you go back, Mike, to the middle of the season when he had the argument with Bill O'Brien and others in the organization. And the next thing you know, Bill O'Brien is gone. I think that's how much the organization thought of J.J. Watt, that when he got in the argument with Bill O'Brien, that he was gone. So that, to me, was a signal at that point that J.J. Watt's days in Houston were numbered. And as it turned out, they were. And, you expressed at the trade deadline that perhaps the Texans may look to trade him somewhere at the trade deadline. They didn't, so they didn't get anything for him, and they cut him, and now he gets to pick where he wants to go, and he gets ahead of free agency, Mike.
Yeah, and look, they weren't going to bring him back at a $17 million salary. It was not going to happen. We're going to talk about that more coming up. Let's hear a little bit more, though, from J.J. Watt, his press conference from Week 16, where it was becoming more and more clear he was exasperated with the effort or lack thereof of the individuals who were around him on that roster. Here he is.
You can't go out there and you can't work out. You can't show up on time. You can't practice. You can't want to go out there and win. You shouldn't be here because this is a privilege. It's the greatest job in the world. You get to go out and play a game. And if you can't care enough, even in Week 17, even when you're trash, when you're 4-11, if you can't care enough to go out there and give everything you've got and try your hardest, that's bullshit.
That was a very, very inspiring and motivating effort from J.J. Watt, and it was obvious he was becoming frustrated, to say the least, with what was going on. And we already knew, I think, he wasn't going to be back. We knew that this was going to be. And what surprised me, and I'm going to go ahead and jump right into it, Charean, it surprised me that they let him go without trying to trade him. It would have been difficult, but 33 days in advance of free agency, he gets that head start. They didn't try to go to him and say, look, we have you under contract for one more year. We'd like to work something out where maybe we get a 6th or a 7th round pick and you agree to a reduced salary and we find the team and we'll contact whoever you want. We'll let your agent set it up. We'd like to get something in return for what we're giving up here. Otherwise, we're going to wait until March 17 to release you. Teams do that all the time. Last year, the Panthers released tight end Greg Olsen right after the Super Bowl. They held on to Cam Newton into late March because they thought maybe they could get something for him as he was entering the last year of his contract. That kind of surprised me. And, at a time when there isn't a whole lot of goodwill floating around the Texans organization, that probably is something that we could look at and say, hey, they did the guy a favor. They did the guy a solid. They did the guy something that they didn't have to do. And you don't see that from a lot of teams because teams have their contractual rights and teams try to turn them into anything. That 6th-round pick could have become a Hall of Famer. I mean, Tom Brady was a 6th-round pick. I know it's rare that happens, but those picks have value, and I'm just surprised they didn't try to flip the remaining year of the contract into something and instead gave him that head start on free agency.
But are you really surprised, Mike? I mean, we are talking about the Houston Texans, right?
Well, yeah, look, as we've established, whenever there's a decision that they can make that is not the right decision, that is the decision they will make. But it does engender some goodwill with J.J. Watt, and who knows? Maybe J.J. Watt made it clear to them, you're either going to let me go now or I'm going to use my social media platforms to just hammer you repeatedly until you do, because I know and you're not going to carry a $17 million salary under my name going into a new league year that quite possibly will have a dramatically reduced salary cap. So it was at some level in their interest if J.J. Watt made it clear that he was not going to be publicly quiet like the other high-profile Texan who wants out of Houston, Deshaun Watson, has chosen to be. Watson has handled his business behind the scenes with no direct statement or plea to be traded. Maybe J.J. Watt, and maybe that tweet from last week was just a taste of what J.J. Watt was going to do if they didn't let him out of Houston. And it's not like any Texans fans would have been upset with him. The Texans fans understand what a dysfunctional mess it is right now in Houston. Cal McNair spoke to just a couple of reporters, I think Adam Schefter and Ian Rappaport, and he said this. And, this is a Deshaun Watson. I'm going to pivot to Deshaun Watson since we're talking about him. There's a lot of misinformation out there. I'll leave it at that. That's what Cal McNair said about Deshaun Watson. Today we want to focus on JJ. Deshaun is our quarterback. He is a Texan. We expect him to remain a Texan, and we'll leave it at that. And, Charean, that amplifies the point you made earlier. No matter what they may have done to try to make a press conference only about J.J. Watt. There was no way this was going to be only about J.J. Watt.
This truly hangs over the organization, Mike, the Deshaun Watson situation, and they're going to bungle that some way. And, I would love to give the Texans credit for this. I hope it truly was just doing the right thing for J.J. Watt. Mike, he has meant so much to that city, so much to that organization, but so much to the city as much as the organization. It's why he won the Walter Payton Man of the Year award, raised over $40 million for Hurricane Harvey relief. And my family was in Hurricane Harvey. I know what that meant for the city of Houston and the surrounding areas. That was huge. He has meant a ton to this organization. And no one will replace J.J. Watt ever again. He's the greatest defensive player, perhaps the greatest player in the organization's history so far. And it is a 19-year history, so it's not like that long, Mike. But I want to believe that the Texans did the right thing by J.J. Watt, and that's all it was. But, the cynic in me, knowing the Texans' history, and I realize Bill O'Brien is gone, but some of the other key players are still there, says they didn't do the right thing in trying to get a draft pick, because you just go back and you look at all the trades that they've bungled in their history, from Dwayne Brown to Jadeveon Clowney to DeAndre Hopkins to giving up a draft pick for Duke, third-round pick for Duke Johnson. I mean, this is an organization that hasn't proved that it knows how to draft, how to compile draft picks, or any of that, Mike. They bungled everything over the last few years, and an organization in the NFL, and perhaps the worst organization in sports right now.
I was on radio earlier this afternoon, 106.7 The Fan in D.C., and the question came up as it relates to the timeline for a Deshaun Watson decision. We had a question earlier this week about the timeline, and that presumes that they know what's good for them. I don't know that they know what's good for them, and that's I'm having such a hard time with this J.J. Watt decision, because was it good for them to cut him with 33 days to go until free agency, or was it good for them to hold on to him and try to work out some sort of a trade? We've heard nothing to suggest that they tried in advance to work something out. I just think they were afraid that JJ was going to come at them with everything he had if they didn't let him go, and they blinked. They didn't want to get into a fight with Captain America, because here's the other side of it too. Yeah, JJ Watt gets an advance start on free agency, but until we know what the salary cap's going to be for 2021, it's going to be hard for him to get full value, because he's going to fall into that group of veteran players who aren't star level, who are going to get squeezed if the cap goes down. So until we know what the cap is going to be, you can't peg what J.J. Watt's value is going to be. He's a lot like the Ndamukong Suh conundrum. I had a GM tell me, look, last year Suh got $8 million. You get Suh on the market this year, he's not getting $8 million. Not just because he's a year older. The Ndamukong Suh from 2020 on the market this year is getting a lot less, because those are the guys who are going to get hurt by a flat or likely depressed salary cap. So those 33 days may just be a lot of talking and visiting and just general concepts and identification of who's interested, but ultimately no hard offers until teams have a better idea of what the cap is going to be.
And when you look, Mike, at what J.J. Watt has said specifically publicly, he was fed up with this organization. There is no question about that. Throughout the year, all of his comments, I mean, he was even short in one press conference with John McClain of the Houston Chronicle, our friend, who we know good and well, that JJ has a lot of respect for. So he was fed up with that organization going back into the middle of the season. I think he was fed up with losing. It is not going to surprise me if at some point we hear that J.J. Watt went above Cal McNair, even to Cal McNair's mother, Janice McNair, and appealed to her and said, Janice, do me a solid here. I want to be cut. I want to go try to find another team. Let me go now. And Janice ordered this to happen. It's not going to surprise me at all, Mike, if that happened and the organization did do him a solid, but he might have gone to Janice McNair above everybody else in that organization to ask for this to be done.
Well, I joked when it first happened, hey, all that Deshaun Watson has to do is ask to be released, because apparently that's the way you get out. Don't ask for a trade, ask to be released, and you get what you want. And look, I posted a tweet earlier today, and it was part sociological experiment and part expression of absolute fact. Watson has gotten crickets in response to his request for a trade. Watt asks to be released, and they immediately let him go. There is, I know it's different situations. It's apples and oranges. It's a young ascending quarterback and an aging descending defensive lineman who they're likely going to cut. But the idea that they did something they didn't have to do for Watt and could have tried to trade him and could have squatted on him for another month and chose not to. That's the distinguishing characteristic. For Watt, they did something they didn't have to do. For Watson, they've given no indication that they're willing to do something they don't have to do.
Yeah, no question about it, Mike. And we'll see how the Deshaun Watson situation plays out. I have a feeling they're going to bungle that too with the people I've talked to within the organization. They're going to sit on Deshaun Watson. They are now telling teams, we're not trading Deshaun Watson. He's going to hold out. This is going to go beyond the draft, and they're not going to get what they could have otherwise gotten for him. I believe that's going to happen. I have no doubt in my mind that's going to happen, that they're going to have a standoff, and this is going to come to a head after Deshaun Watson holds out. And at that point, Mike, once you pass draft time, teams have their quarterbacks, they're set. What are you going to do at quarterback? How are you going to get this guy traded for what he should go for, which at a minimum, as we've said, is 3 first-round draft picks?
And, the talk has been that he's very serious about this. This isn't a bluff. This isn't huffing and puffing. He is indeed going to never play for the Texans again and will hold out into the regular season. And if he has to give back money, so be it. He's a guy who comes from nothing. He's not afraid of having to write a check back to the Texans because he still will have a lot more than he otherwise would have had. And his mind was made up, and I think that's why he waited to use the magic phrase, please trade me, because he knew what the implication was, and he knew that if he did it, he was locked into a course of action that there would be no turning back from. And I respect the fact that he's willing to do that and isn't going to be the guy who shows up and just decides to be a problem and decides to say my ankle hurts or my back hurts or I have a pulled hamstring or I can't practice today or I'm just going to be a problem until you trade me. He's not wired that way. And I'm not passing judgment against the guys who choose that path. I just think that for him, if it's more comfortable, if it's better, if it's the right thing for him to do to just never show up again, then that's his decision, that's his choice. And he's a big boy. He understands the consequences of that, and it sounds like he's willing to take them.
Boy, this has been crazy, Mike, how far this organization has fallen in such a short amount of time. You think about all the players they had on this team, from Jadeveon Clowney to DeAndre Hopkins to J.J. Watt. Deshaun Watson wants out. I mean, they had a real chance to win a championship, and they failed to get it done, which is one reason that J.J. Watt's out of there now, Mike. If you lose Deshaun Watson, you've got even less of a chance to do that over the next few years.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.